sign off. And so, Naveen, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Fish. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm glad to see that there are so decent participation here. Lots of folks that I've worked with in the past. In fact, one of my teachers here as well, Venkat's Dive Shop, is where I did my first open water course and all of that. So yeah, I'm glad to you know be present here amongst all the folks that I've worked with at some point, at least some of you all whom I've worked with in the past. So yeah, so without much jibber jabbering, I'll also get into my talk. I'm just gonna share the screen and start off. All right. Is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Thanks. Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to talk mostly about, yeah, hi, I'm Naveen, Naveen Nambutri. Like Vish introduced, I'm the director of this organization called Dakshin Foundation. By training, I'm a marine biologist, and yeah, that's pretty much where my heart lies. And Dakshin is an organization that's been working on coastal and marine conservation related issues for the last 12 years. And we we work in multiple sites along the Indian coast, from the islands in the Andaman, Nicobar, Lakshadweep, to also sites on the mainland, particularly Maharashtra, Orissa, um, also Tamil Nadu, and we do have presence in most coastal states through our partners as well. We work closely with existing folks who are already there and doing good work on ground. So we work a lot in partnership with folks as well. So one of the initiatives that Dakshin has been involved in, and this started off as a citizen science initiative in the Andamans, and actually the idea kind of goes back to our work in Lakshadweep, where uh, you know where our initiative was to try and convert a lot of day-to-day observations, people who depend on natural resources, and go out there, be it forest, be it the ocean, be it on land, wherever. Folks who depend on the natural resources constantly interact with it, and they go out there. They probably don't understand it in a scientific way, the way a lot of us researchers understand it, but they understand it because it's a very kind of a use-based relationship that they have, and that's a very distinct and different relationship from the kind of relationships that a lot of the folks who are involved in, who really enjoy diving, for instance, do it for the aesthetics of the whole process of diving, and for the others it's all the exploration and associated with it and all of that. But for the fisher communities or the people who depend on these resources directly, for them it's a livelihood, a source of their livelihoods as well. So for them it's a much deeper and much stronger connection as well, and day in day out they interact with these systems. So they have a huge repository of information of what's happening in marine systems. And in the terrestrial, at least, we can see these things directly, and we ourselves have access to some of these systems. So access wise, terrestrial systems are a lot more easier to work with, but marine systems are very challenging, because even with the incredible technology that's kind of helped us access the life underwater is also quite limited. We just are able to access systems within, say, 30 to 40 meters depth, which is pretty much the limits for recreational diving. So in that context, what we started off was to try and look, how do you tap into this knowledge that's there with the fisher communities? How do you try and use that information, those day-to-day observations, the day-to-day interactions with those systems? How do you use that to kind of inform and strengthen your understanding of those systems, but also to to kind of use that information to better manage and conserve those natural systems? So that's how we started working with fisher communities in Lakshadweep. We picked Lakshadweep mainly because the levels of literacy there are quite high. So people are not the fishers themselves are not very shy or averse to collecting information. So we started the project there, and it's been going on for the last 5 to 6 years now. And it's been mainly, the objective has been for them to just collect very simple data on the amount of fish they catch, what kind of fish they caught, and how much time it took for them to collect those, to catch those fish. And a lot of this, even though there's a science to, the process of collecting data, the data tables itself was co-created. We went and sat down with the fisher communities and talked to them extensively about the kind of information they'd like to, to help them understand their own systems better, but also for us to kind of, as researchers and scientists and managers, to understand those, systems better. So it was a co-created data collection protocol, and it's been going on. We have more than, I think more than 4,000, 5,000 data points right now. Every trip, not there's no 100% participation yet, but I think over the years we've managed to get at least 30-40% of the, boats that operate in these islands to kind of participate on and off. Some join and then drop off. Others have been continuing for a fairly long time. And it's incredible the amount of data that can be generated just from one, from one boat. And if you pull these things together, and the other thing to keep in mind is that these systems, like I said, are one, inaccessible, also extremely, widespread. The practice of fishing, for instance, is extremely widespread. So it's impossible for, even though there are fisheries departments and research institutions, it's impossible for one single entity to keep track of all collect data at, each and every scale of each and every boat, because we have, I think, around 3,200 plus fishing villages just scattered along our coastline. So that, and around 16 million, at least 4 million people are directly, involved in fisheries operations and stuff like that. So, if you could tap into those kind of, of a of scale, I mean, operate at those scales, you're talking about large amount of information that can really be valuable. And this is actually information collected on a day-to-day basis across seasons, across time, and spatially and temporally, like large-scale data sets, which is pretty much the dream of any, manager. And that can really help you undertake very nuanced management practices as well, to each and specific to each and every area. So then we thought of, extending these, the philosophy of it, which is, folks who interact with natural systems also could be potential eyes and ears out there, right? So for us, the ocean, the people who are involved in the dive industry, for instance, are pretty much like great resources for understanding the ocean systems better. And Reef Log kind of was born out of that idea, where we kind of talked to multiple dive shops, particularly in the Andamans, and looked at what are ways in which we can tap into. There are so many people who come and dive there and go, and if each of them collect very simple data sets, that's like really valuable, and its contribution is humongous for reef management and stuff. And it's also one way of giving back to the systems that as divers we all like so much, right? So there's one way of kind of giving back to those systems you know what they deserve in terms of at least our small contribution to this. So that's the way we kind of envision Reef Log. And I think it's probably the first of its kind for India. And like I said, we worked with a few dive shops in the Andamans, and the idea was to not make it, because we wanted it to be something that even a novice diver could use, not necessarily something that required a good understanding of what fish it is, and how to tell an urchin from, say, a starfish. I mean, there are all kinds of questions that a novice might have. So what we went through multiple iterations. We had to go through different potential options for how to structure our program, our Reef Log, our data collection protocols, and that went through multiple iterations. And we've tested it out in a few sites, and listed below in the slide are a few of the dive shops on the Andamans that had participated in it. And it's also not just to collect information on specific species, but it's also to kind of collect information on the general observations of these as well. And over time, this information is going to be really valuable. Yeah. So this is how the slates look, and this is pretty much it. It's very simple. We have good detailed illustrations of the, and this is very specific to the Andamans. And I think most of these initiatives need to be very locality specific and needs to kind of cater to, what's available there. And that's how, we've designed these slates. And what you see here on the left, the top and bottom panel on the left, I'm just going to pick the pointer option. Yeah, these two panels are for the reef fish, and this is basically because there are illustrations out there. It's possible even for a novice diver to confuse this fish with a different fish. Quite often, even experts find it difficult to, kind of distinguish between different species of fish, because it might just be different because there's a spot there and they don't have a spot. So that kind of, you know, uh, understanding and that kind of experience is not expected in, kind of novice divers. So what we have here is these illustrations, and these illustrations of the species that have been picked out there have been carefully handpicked. So groupers, for instance, on the top are pretty much like the top predators on reefs. And not just that, the particular group of species that you see here is also called locally in the Andamans called dollar machi. Dollar machi means basically it's called dollar machi because the people know that it's a really high export value. It doesn't have any value locally. It's not a preferred fish, but in Chinese market, I mean in the Southeast Asian markets, particularly in China, it's of really high demand, and mainly because they have a practice of eating red fish during the Chinese New Year. And if you look at the scales of harvest of these species, you can see a clear hike when it's closer to the to the particular when the Chinese New Year is happening. And the rest of the fish, all these have important functional roles. By functional roles, I mean each of them have a role to play in the ecosystem, like how in a forest you have deers and other herbivores like mega herbivores like elephants and others who have a very critical role in keeping the vegetation and all of that under control. Similarly, um, you know you have lions and tigers and others who play the role of the top predators. You have wolves and jackals and stuff that play the intermediary predatory role. And then you have herbivores and all kinds of different organisms that play different roles in the ecosystem. Similarly, in the marine systems as well, different species of fish or different groups of fish have different functions to perform, and these are really critical functions that they perform. And like here, the species of parrotfish that you can see here are, what we call the herbivores. And the bumphead parrotfish, for instance, plays the role of a potentially like what an elephant could do in a forest, right? So they're like the constantly feeding away on the algae and things that grow on the reefs. And this is critical because if you have too much of algae growing on a reef, the live coral cover will go down. The number of live corals there will decrease and decline. So these are some of the functional groups. You have invertebrates. Some of these the butterfly fish picked here, like the Mayer's butterfly and the rip butterfly fish here. They're corallivores, so their presence indicates a good live coral coverage in that area. You won't see these fishes in areas where there isn't enough live coral cover. Some of these are the triggerfish, for instance, is a critical invertebrate. They feed on invertebrates and they help, like particularly on sea urchins. Triggerfish are known to be excellent predators of sea urchins. And sea urchin populations, again, the critical sea urchins are the ones that have been listed here in the invertebrate slide. Sea urchins also play a critical role in the in reef systems because they are also herbivores, and even though they're invertebrates, they also feed on the algae, and they also erode the reefs a lot more than many other, like for instance, a parrotfish may do. and they break down the coral structure, the three-dimensional structure that's present there. Um, so in a way, the presence of triggerfish, for instance, keep the sea urchins under control. And if they're not under control, they could literally, there are cases in the Caribbean where sea urchin populations have exploded exponentially. And, they had to have programs where they removed sea urchins from, regularly from the reefs to try and what they do is by eating away on the algae, they kind of broke down the entire reef structure, and were major collapses in, reef diversity in many of the in many Caribbean reefs thanks to sea urchin outbreaks. So, and that's kind of linked to, excessive extraction of some of these invertebrates, the ones that feed on invertebrates, right? So these are carefully handpicked species, and on the bottom you have a section where you can also log specific events, and these are very critical. Again, these may not be things that happen on every dive, but things that are, very, very critical nonetheless. For instance, spawning aggregation that's indicated by two fish there with a, heart symbol. Spawning aggregation is basically I mean, you all know what those are, right? I mean, these are aggregations where a large number of fish come together, they all spawn in large numbers and then just move off, right? But if you want to conserve a particular species of fish, you need to protect those spawning aggregations. You need to protect the sites where they aggregate for spawning. And you don't need big, massive marine protected areas and lead to multiple conflicts with, local fisher communities and all of that. But instead, if you know exactly what time of the year, and these are synchronized events, and it's not difficult to predict these things. Like a coral spawning, for instance, is a very synchronized event, and it happens pretty much at the same during the same windows, and it becomes predictable after a while. So you really need to, protect some of these things. Those are like the really valuable bits of information that, it might be something that you may have observed and probably forgotten, or probably, one would be saying these stories to people who come here and dive in your shops and all of that. But then again, for a researcher like me to know that, hey, this particular species of fish aggregate here at this particular time of the year is really critical. So some of these, and then functional groups also, like barracuda aggregations, schools and things like that, which are not necessarily constantly present, migrating shoals of fish and all of that, tuna runs, all those things are like additional information that nevertheless is also quite valuable. And if possible, one could also record size classes of these, because that's also very critical. If you know that this fish grows to a really large size and all you see are like really tiny ones, it means they're all recruits and juveniles, which is also very a good sign in a way that, there are lots of juvenile fish and recruitment happening. Same way for the invertebrates as well. Some of these, like the trochus shell, for instance, that's listed here, is something that is extremely sought out for their commercial value as shells. They were protected under the Wildlife Protection Act in India, but still, now it's opened up in some places, the harvest of these species. But again, their presence and absence indicates the amount of fishing pressure that a particular site is going through. And lobsters again are indicators of fishing pressure. There are species like sponges. The number of sponges or other kinds of soft corals, for instance, present in an area is a very good indication of the nutrient levels. Usually the productivity levels. Usually you find sponges in much higher numbers in areas where there's really high productivity, a lot of phyto and zooplankton available in the water column. So those are again, which are probably not the best situations for for corals to grow. So quite often sponges and corals also kind of compete with each other. And there are options to record, say, urchin populations, densities in sites where you've dived. If you come across, say, a jellyfish bloom, that's also critical and useful to record these things. And it has a ruler on top which helps you. I mean, if you're measuring, say, the size of urchins generally and trying to include that, or if you want to know approximately how much a certain fish's length is, you could use the ruler on top to kind of calibrate stuff. Yeah. And yeah, like I said, these are like picked based on their functional roles, and here this is their uh, you know ecological functions in the food chain, but also, like I said, some of these species are of high commercial value, like the Napoleon wrasse, for instance, is really highly sought out kind of a fish in Southeast Asia. So it's also a good indication of fishing pressure and other things that are happening on the reefs. And we've also picked species that are distinct, and you cannot confuse these species with other, species of fish. So which is why we've kind of, even within butterfly fish, there are so many species. But the reason why we picked these two species are because it does the role of telling you that they are. I mean, it does the role of being a corallivore, but also, is easy to identify and log. And the way data is, and then this is with the invertebrates as well. We also have like coral eaters, like the crown of thorn starfish here. You have algae eaters listed out here. These are the planktivores. Their presence and absence is again very good indication of what's happening in the water. And also you have detritivores, like things that feed on the bottom detritus, and their populations are also good indications of what's, how much of detritus is getting added to the system. And here is a slide basically to give, this is basically a filled up sheet to kind of show how this works. So you can write down some basic, information here. And we work closely with the dive shop. So we don't need every time the participant to enter the lat long and all of that, because we know, where the wall is and the Nemo reef is, or the dive operators know where it is. It's easier to work with them, and not, we try to make it like as less. The problem is the minute it becomes a little tedious, what happens is, you know, people tend to not, want to participate in this. The more cumbersome or tedious the process begins, people tend to opt out of it. And this happened after multiple iterations. We tried out different versions, and this is pretty much what we kind of, zeroed in on. And there are guidelines for these. We have a bunch of additional materials that goes along with the, with the slates. And these are slates that are designed to be taken underwater. There's a small hole to clip in a pencil, and these can be given, and once it's done, you can just erase it and use it again. But someone will have to take that information and save it onto some kind of a Excel sheet or a database. And even from that point of view, it's way more easier to just kind of make it as simple as it is, as it can be, because then it makes the process of data entry and putting that information together also easy. Otherwise, all this information is lost because, people just don't have the time or the bandwidth to enter these data sets. So we have, Excel files that go along with it, which can be put on a pen drive and shared with dive shops. And the way data is collected is very simple. And it's not, I mentioned the pen drive because the site that we tried working in was in the Andamans, where, internet connectivity and all of that is really bad. And, but in other sites where there's connectivity and stuff, you could move all of this online, and you could easily convert it into an app that anyone could just enter this data on, and, there you are. And the idea was to put this onto a central database where people who have contributed from different sites could also go back and see the information that they've collected and, contributed to a larger cause. And the way the data is collected is simple tally marks, 4 tally, 5 tallies across, and it makes it very, very simple and easy to collect this data as well. Yeah. And it has some basic information on, what the do's and don'ts as well. Yeah, and also some of the, this is like a slightly more enlarged version of the notes on the back of the slate, and that has options to include rare sightings, like sharks and stuff are there on most dive monitoring protocols. But what we're finding is that these are very rare sightings. It's like sea turtles and all of these things. It's not like every dive you go, you probably see. In certain sites, you might see them, but not necessarily every dive you see, sharks or turtles. So these are like listed as rare, and you don't see like massive, like numbers of them as well, right? So these are like occasional sightings and stuff. So we have a section for them to include some of these rare sightings, and a small log for logging the kind of waste or plastic waste and all of those trash that you come across in the oceans as well. And that's also very simple stuff that people could write down, right? Um, yeah, and also to survey organisms found in like schooling fish. It's very difficult to use the tally mark kind of a system to kind of quantify schooling fish, but nevertheless they're very critical as well. These schooling fish are very excellent indicators of health of the reef systems. So what we've done is we've kind of for some of these schooling fish, we've just given the silhouettes. We don't want like very specific. If they can break it down to a species level, well and good. But from experience, even from experienced divers, it's very difficult to kind of tell species apart. Even I struggle to tell different types of trevallies and stuff unless you're very up close to the school. It's very difficult to tell them. So it's easier to just do you know put them into these broad categories based on their shapes, and then just do a very, rather than trying to count them one by one, just put them into these broad categories and bins as to how much you saw. Same goes with the invertebrates as well. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's just a repeat. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that's pretty much it with the Reef Log initiative. And, I'd be happy to, kind of, if more and more dive shops took this up. And I think the reason why things kind of fell through the cracks and it really hasn't been, scaled up to all dive shops potentially that are operating within India is because, one, it's very locality specific. So I think we'll have to work with a lot of you all to, kind of put together similar protocols for the sites where you work in, rather than using one protocol. One shoe fits all doesn't really help, and it doesn't really help if you want to manage reefs in Goa. You really need information from Goa. You can't have like a uh, you know broad protocol which really doesn't relate to what's happening in, say, a site in Goa or a site in Lakshadweep. Or Lakshadweep probably could use some of these species. There's some overlap, but again it becomes, you still need to tweak these things to kind of tailor it to local requirements. So we're open to working with all of you to kind of develop these, protocols and stuff. And like I said, because of connectivity and other issues, we couldn't really like digitize this, which meant someone had to go physically to these dive shops and try and collate that information. Sometimes, this information is there, and we really can't reach Havelock on time to pick up that information. So some of those logistics and other reasons where the reasons why this really hasn't kind of been scaled up across sections. And let me know how we should take this forward. We can discuss this in detail. I think let's get into a more detailed conversation about how to make this practical and applicable in the sites that you all work in. And every site, I think each and every site we can tailor it, or even the invertebrate section and stuff like that. One can tweak it and make it very specific to some of the sites that we work in. And it doesn't even require too much of effort on anyone's part, because most of the programs don't uh, take off or fail mostly because of these limitations. Yeah, so if we can collectively discuss now and see how one could address a lot of these issues and concerns, I am happy to. And feel free to use the protocol and kind of adapt it to your system. If you can't, if we don't have the bandwidth to come there and literally help you out, just use the protocol. We can help design some of these things. We could collectively try and see if we can raise some money to kind of get these slates printed, have one person coordinate this throughout. But then being a part of this is also, and also how to incentivize this for the dive shop, right? Because dive shops and for the people who are participating in it. And I think that's also really critical. So if folks like SSI and Paddy and others kind of, at least at an India scale, kind of promote this as part of their, and dive shops are also are welcome to promote this, right? Like you can use the Reef Log branding and all of that and use it on your websites. Probably we were even thinking of putting together some of these badges that folks could put on BCDs, or it could be anything else in a way for anyone who's participated in this could contribute. could could get something out of it, right? So that's what we have in mind for this, and I'm happy to take questions. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Great, Naveen. Thanks so much. We have two questions already.
Yeah.
And one is the question is from Suhas, which is basically how much data have you gathered so far and how useful has it been? What kind of tangible benefits have you got from this kind of collected data?
So yeah, I can see the chats now. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So we started this off as a initially whatever we've done so far is to try and do all the, we've done multiple rounds of iterations with this, and like I said, we've been working in the Andamans, so we've gotten I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many data points have been collected, but I think we have about um, I think about 50 to 100, somewhere in that range, number of people who've contributed to this. But then, like I said, it really didn't take off the ground because there was no follow-up and stuff like that. So once we distributed the slates to different dive shops, like I said, someone had to physically go and visit each of these shops independently and collect that information back. Some of the shops didn't have a laptop or an Excel sheet or didn't have the bandwidth to kind of set aside that time because it was still in a testing phase. So it's been tried and tested, and a lot of the troubleshooting and stuff has gone through, but we really it's still quite small. And in terms of tangible benefits, very very premature to say what those benefits are. I think more than the data itself, what it does is for us the information that comes out, and this is again something we debated endlessly. What's the objective of doing this? Is it to collect really rigorous scientific data? Will an initiative like this help you create really rigorous scientific data that can help manage those reefs? Maybe, maybe not. We still don't know that yet. It has definitely has the potential to, even with these simple things that one can collect, there's still a lot of information. I mean, a lot of insights that one can get from these, from the process. But for us, the big advantage is getting the people hooked into the system, right? You're looking at, so if it goes along with the supplementary materials that we provide to the shops, which unfortunately I don't have soft copies to show here. I can share this with you all if separately. But it gives an opportunity for people to open their eyes and see these things, not just, I mean, the first few dives may be about survival and keeping themselves alive and panic and all of that, but after that, not just go out and enjoy the aesthetics of it, but also try and see you know see what's happening out there. What are those organisms out there? What is it that they're doing? Why is it important that you have a Napoleon ras? I mean, why is a Napoleon ras, for instance, an interesting species? Why is the crown of thorns you know a critical thing? What happens is, no matter where you go and dive, you'll keep an eye out for these things. You might see a different species of parrotfish, but in your head, you're also registering it as a, oh, here you go, that's a parrotfish. And that's good to see there's a herbivore in this reef. And then, a good population of herbivore in this reef. And then you might see other sites where, there might be a lot of urchin outbreaks. You'd be like, hey, what's going on here? There are way too many sea urchins here. How can we, this is good or bad? And then it gets you thinking a lot more, not just going out there and doing the process of diving alone, but it kind of triggers a lot more a sense of engagement. It also kind of gets people involved in not just doing this as a recreational activity, but take it a little bit more seriously than that. Yeah, I think there's another question from Suhas that is, can you share your contact with me via email? I can just type out my email ID here.
Yeah.
So whoever it is, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to take this forward. Any other questions? There's a
Could I have a
question from
question about common protocol? And I think you've already covered that because of the location and different species being available at different locations and things like that. So maybe and she says if dive shops can make logs themselves. Yes, we've already made our own log, so I'm sure it can be, with, and I'm going to work with you on this, Naveen, to make my log a little bit more easy to use. Like you said, it's a bit informative. Information is a bit complicated, but yeah, I mean, I don't think dive shops cannot make their own logs, but I think the slate which the Reef Log has from that's better. That's a better tool, so to say.
Yeah, it's just two slides which you can, I mean, two slates that you can just put with a, a tag, a zip tag or whatever, and then you can just put it in on your BCD or wherever and take it down, and you can enter data and come back. And just tally marks, right? So it's every time you see one, you're just like making a record there. But I had a question for, I mean, if it's okay with you, Vish, I mean,
Please.
with folks jumping in and responding, I had a question for all of you in the sense that
Would you want me to open it up so everybody can talk to you? Because I think
I'm happy with that, because I don't think there are too many people, right? So as long as people can just wait till the question is responded to, and
yeah. So I mean, just for everybody out there, I mean, you can type what you call unmute yourself and ask a question directly, and just remember to mute yourself once you're done with the question. Thanks.
any questions?
Naveen, just an observation. I've been in touch with Reef in US, and they are doing this
That's Reef Check.
Reef Watch, I think. Not
Reef
sure.
Check, no?
Reef Check.
Yeah.
And they have been doing a lot of this stuff, and they also have a lot of, I think, material available.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was just going through their website, funnily enough, just a few days ago. And so this is really interesting to see you're already doing it. That's great.
So that's again, Venkat, that's something that we did think of, right? Why should we create another protocol and invest time and energy into something that's already there? Organizations like Reef Check have it, and they've been doing it at a global scale as well. But I think that while it does help capture some of the larger, at a very broad level, it helps give you some insights. If you really want to do something for the reefs in Goa, you really have to have a tailor-made one for for those sites, or for other sites where you dive, right? Netrani and other sites. You want to have some, you want to create some information that's really valuable, and like someone asked, something that's a very tangible output from it. It needs to be a locally relevant kind of a thing. So I think that local relevance is what, for us, we feel is really critical to kind of plug into the protocols. Otherwise, it just becomes some kind of a, and also ownership and stuff, right? Like we really wanted to be a little bit the dive shops also to get credit from these things. So we are very, and how we use the data. This is data that y'all are collecting or facilitating to collect, right? So the ownership and all of that also needs to be with you. So even though whether to make it publicly available, open access, is all up to you all. So for us, we're very flexible with all of that, and we're happy if someone else takes the protocol and just runs with it as well. We don't have, as long as it serves the purpose for which it was set up, we're happy with that.
In my NGO, we have started doing uh, sort of a database on inaturalist.org.
Yeah.
And I've just been in touch with all the dive centers to contribute their photographs of
Yeah.
whatever they have seen in Goa.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very data deficient, whatever is here. And of course, individually, dive centers have been taking photographs by themselves, but it would be nice to share it in one place.
Yeah.
And we are happy to give them credit for whatever they have taken and whatever they have contributed. So that is one way we started. But yeah, this also is very interesting when you have a fairly large water, and if you can manage to, as you said, keep the logistics organized, then it would be a very good way of collecting data. But on the other hand, we are.
So Venkat, what would you feel are some of the challenges in implementing something like this? I can give you a bucket list of stuff. I mean, aside from the technological and connectivity issues, there are multiple other issues and challenges in implementing? Because for one, certain dive shops, the energy level of engagement goes down after the first few, this thing. And I think to kind of sustain that energy level, there's, you know, we thought of different ways of incentivizing it, probably, use it, brand it, make your dive shop sound more, convince the people who are coming there that you're running this operation not just as an economic activity, but also, you are really concerned about the reef systems and things like that. So what do you think are some of the implementation challenges?
I think giving the divers themselves also some form of incentive would also be helpful. Everybody, of course, today we are on a bandwagon, to be very honest. Everybody wants to save the environment and be seen as doing that more than
Yeah.
actually
Be
doing it.
seen as the operative. So how can one, you know,
Yeah,
how can one work on that? And so the
exactly.
others
And so
would,
if you
given
have
the
a
option, would pick it. I mean, folks were
I mean,
really wanted
sorry
to.
to bump in here, but I was thinking like if we could uh, like a giveaway kind of thing. If you log 10 dives with 10 data driven dives, which is basically means that they're going to be coming and diving with one of the operators who are using the Reef Log, we probably give them a reusable water bottle or something, which really doesn't cost much, but with the Reef Log branding and that kind of thing, which would maybe then make them feel that it's worth doing something as well, because there's always this or like what Venkat is talking about, which is a great initiative, the iNaturalist thing,
Yeah.
where everybody who puts in data actually gets credited, and they can use it for their own branding and their own promotion later on.
Yeah.
But for an individual diver who's just coming for a fun dive, I think the only, I mean, in my opinion, either a free dive, or maybe I would like really think about a bottle or a coffee mug kind of thing, a heated thing with a branding, which is
Yeah.
really not too expensive if you look at the overall cost.
also a free dive would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vish, I think that's a good idea as well. I was just about to mention that. That's everybody's looking for a freebie dive is even more special.
Yeah.
So
Because the thing was, the glass or something was that they could take it back and it would be promoted more
long-term
in their,
use, yeah.
yes, if
Yeah.
they're taking it to office and they have a coffee mug with Reef Log and Barracuda or Scuba Evolution India as the
Let's say I contributed to, you know,
exactly, and
whatever.
it's a
Yes.
community boost, right, for them as well, because then at the end of it, what is Instagram and what is Facebook? It's all an ego boost for our personal social media, so to say. So it's something like that. It's good for them to be seen doing something good and makes them feel better. So it's just that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
I think that's a great idea. And I mean, and what do you think about the rigor of it? Could it include more stuff in it? Because Vish, you were showing me the protocol that you had in your shop, right? So, and
So mine
for
is
me, I
very
mean,
generic.
ideally as a researcher, I would love people to give me that information from every dive, but I think some of that might be a little daunting for a novice, unless some of the senior divers in the shop are going out specifically to collect that kind of an information. So, just wondering,
Right.
you
One
know,
of the things is that when you're doing a course, it's extremely difficult, both as a diver and as an instructor, to be taking data, and extremely incorrect for the instructor to be taking data at that point in time when they should be concentrating solely on the student. So, given that most of us actually don't go out fun diving for data collection, like Venkat has some, I mean, Venkat is probably the only person who actually goes out for data collection dives amongst all of us specifically. I mean, when we go for a fun dive, we probably log it, but it's not a data collection dive really. But you're right. I mean, we would, to maintain the kind of rigor that is required for a proper log, we would need to have somebody, maybe at the end of the day, do the last dive, just logging stuff, and then come back. So it's at least half an hour of data collected by at least one diver per shop, or per boat, to get something for a site. I don't. That's the only way it could be done, because otherwise you're requiring funds for a full boat of researchers going out and or data collection day.
so so are most of the dives that one does, coast dives, or are they? I mean, I'm sure there would be more folks coming for recreational dives as well, right? Like generally to get a dive in and
Primarily courses, I would say, in Goa, and more the entry level courses. So that also, as Navish said, that is a big problem in having a. If you have pleasure divers who are just coming for pleasure dives, then that would be ideal to run
that's
this
the
with.
idea. Yeah, that we were thinking of mostly, because this was worked out mostly keeping the Andaman, system in mind. A lot of it was targeting, we definitely were not thinking of the BSD dives and all of that tamasha that goes on there, but mostly thinking of people who come there as, for fun dives, right? And not necessarily
Oh,
to do a course. Or even if
correct.
they do a course, usually people do stay back and do a couple of more fun dives before they head out. So if, I think this would only work for fun dives, like you said. I don't see how it will work for a course dive, but probably for a fun dive it might be useful.
For example, advanced course, you could use it because we have fish ID, we have coral ID, all that. You could club it with that. But yeah, ideally speaking, I think also, I mean, I'm being brutally honest. The quality of dive staff which comes, dive masters or instructors, they themselves don't know one fish from the other. In that situation, it becomes very difficult. You need to have somebody who's very knowledgeable, at
Yeah,
least to dive with the pleasure divers,
yeah,
and give them a good briefing beforehand, about what they can expect to see locally, show them the photographs, and then, of course, the data charts, which you said, that's a great tool. And since they're waterproof, as you
yeah,
said, it's idiot proof to carry it around. That would be great. Another limitation in Goa, of course, is the visibility.
yeah.
So you really need very, very small numbers of divers going with one guide, for instance, and it shouldn't be an objective of covering distance. It should be more of looking at all the small things which are there, which make the dive so much more interesting and
Yeah,
relevant from the conservation point of view.
yeah.
And I think it's great because when people learn about what one species, what's the importance of every species, because that to me is one of the most interesting things about a dive, to figure out which fish is important and why, and what effect they have on the reef is so very important.
And I think it also opens up multiple conversations, right? I mean,
Oh,
with your
yes. Oh, yes.
you engage with your dive. I mean, whoever's coming and diving in your shop, you're engaging with them a lot more than just that's a came, paid money, and left off kind of a
Yes.
video.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
That is one of
So
the
I,
most sorry Venkat, I
no, no,
just
go ahead. Go
need
ahead.
to
Dakshin,
jump
go
into
ahead.
this because this is something which is really which I've learned from you, thank you, thanks to being one of your students again, is that most of the staff, they literally, and when I say staff, I mean dive instructors and even owners on the dive boats, uh, find it at times when we come back from the boat, either it's extremely tiring for us or with whatever, I don't really know, but there's very little interaction with the divers thereafter. Again, I'm being pretty brutal here because we are all slightly guilty of it at some point in time, and that is one thing which really needs to be done in terms of uh, just taking out the charts again and refreshing, and there is this as instructors and as educators, so to say, there is something which we all keep forgetting, that your the time frame of retention is actually very low. And if you don't remind people what they saw immediately after a dive, maybe pull out the laminated chart and show it to them, or maybe when the boat is going back, because like in Goa, for example, we have an hour to go back. During that time, if you just refresh what's there and put it down in the logbook, or make it have a discussion about it, it's a lot better to retain for everybody. And that, I mean, that needs to be done. Again, like Venkat was saying, people not having a background, I mean, that's my opinion, is that people not having a background in marine ecology or marine biology can change with the time of them spending the proper time in the dive shop and learning about stuff, rather than
I
just
think this could be used to get the folks, the staff also trained. I mean, at
right.
least use this
Oh,
basic thing to
yes. Oh,
train up your
yes.
staff and
Yeah,
tell them, hey, these
That is
ecological.
critical. I think even before starting the program, all the staff should first be trained and, all also made aware of the importance of the whole thing. It's not
Yes.
just doing it because otherwise they'll start looking at it like a chore. I think that's probably what happened with the program.
Yeah.
That initial enthusiasm wanes off very quickly. And it's very easy to just say, oh yeah, forget it. Why
No,
should
the
we bother?
conversations with owners or, the main people who run the show are fantastic, right? Like how we speak now.
Yeah.
And when you actually hand over the slates and things like that, the person who's implementing it are not probably as engaged as or see the value in a process
Yeah.
like this as, a lot of you all as, the who have a slightly larger, perspective of things are looking at it, right? So like you say,
Right.
Venkat, it becomes like a chore for them rather than a,
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
yeah,
And I can, sympathize with them to a large extent because running a dive center is not easy.
yeah,
The logistics, the headaches with the government, the
yeah,
protocols, it's a pain in the ass, to be very honest.
yeah,
So if we had a dedicated dive center which was just catering to citizen scientists, and which is what I am angling to do, is open the shop only for certified divers with X number of dives as well logged, so that they don't have issues with buoyancy control.
yeah,
And then take them out purely for this. And people who are signing up to come for diving with us would come only for this purpose. So, it becomes very critical and clear.
yeah,
And there would be a good briefing beforehand and after, as Vish said, which is so important, so that the data which is collected also is not diluted in any way
yeah,
because of lack of memory or,
yeah, yeah.
various other factors.
So I'm
So,
going to open this up to other folks.
yes,
Does
yes,
anyone else
sure.
have questions? I thought I saw some couple of them unmute their mics and then just went quiet.
So there's a question further about which Suhas has, are you looking to work with individuals or mostly dive shops and organizations? And
Anything. The answer to that is anybody interested in it can take it. And, there's no,
Sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that it's Suhas here. It's
Yeah.
just a follow up on the question. If individuals need to work on this particular idea, how do they start? Do we contact you for the the required material, or how do we do it?
So where are you planning to dive and stuff? So as an individual, you're asking.
Yeah, to be honest, right now we have no idea where we are going to dive yet in the current situation.
Yeah.
But once the lockdown ends, there's a couple of sites we really want to dive in the Andamans, in I'm sorry, I forgot the name. Near Rameshwaram. What's the site?
Goa.
Yes.
That's what you want to say.
Okay. Go only if you're giving free beer. Don't forget that one. So yeah, but a couple of sites, and I just want to see how it works because I have thought about an idea like this, but I really wasn't sure how to take it forward. So I want to see how it works.
For the Andamans, the dive slates are already ready, and we've tried it, tested it enough times. We're happy to share a couple of slates with you all wherever
Okay.
we're going. And it's just a question of how do you send that information back to us.
I think
So
the best way is to take a photo and just send it to you guys, right? So you can always.
that's what we were doing as well. So after a while, that was the easiest way to do it. Is once you enter the data, just take a picture, WhatsApp
Send
it,
it to you.
and then we'll just enter it onto
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you please send an email, just like with your email address to the idea I mentioned above. When I contacted you, sent you a message now. So maybe we can see if we can go ahead in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. If you've written to me, I'll respond. Bye.
Yeah. Can you share your contact with me via email? I sent that message.
Dr. Naveen, you
yeah.
actually sent your mail ID to my message. It's sent to me privately.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Could you just paste it on the general?
Just paste
Yeah,
it in the group, so everybody gets it, rather
Sorry
than
about that, yeah.
Naveen having to keep pasted to everybody over and over again.
I'm sorry. I'll do.
Just a suggestion. Just taking off from all the conversations that I have heard if you want to make individuals also contribute, is there a way that they can, associate themselves with the Reef Log, for example? Like maybe they have a user account or some way to also see what they're doing, what everybody else is doing. Is there something like that?
We wanted to put together a database of sorts. The large idea was to also have a backend database sort of a thing, which like many of like iNaturalist and other things as well, where one can contribute, provided everyone's comfortable with putting this on. Folks are comfortable putting this on and sharing this with public, then to be available in public. If they prefer to keep it to themselves, keep it to themselves, but right now that's not up. So
Okay.
I mean, if there is enough interest in all of that, we are happy to put some time and effort and money into developing that. But like
Okay.
I said, because it was in the Andamans, it was even getting those photographs sent to us over WhatsApp was not happening because there was no internet
Network.
connectivity and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So,
so if
Naveen, there's another question,
yeah,
which is from Siddharth.
yeah,
Siddharth Raju. It says, can the same species of fish be both good and bad indicator at two different sites? And this is a pertinent question in terms of ecology rather than anything else. So
yeah,
you want to take that on?
too much of anything, like too much of anything is problematic. So I think it depends on, so your tally marks will tell us, right? So the wall, for instance, if this is wall is a site in Havelock where folks are taken regularly, and interesting sites as well. So you know some of these things are, if you see 10 different Napoleon Rosses in a site like that, that's a little bit of a concern. Then it will trigger like a question for us, and then one would probably have to then go out and dig this a little deeper. But it's not necessary that certain species, they're indicative of a certain or process. It doesn't have a good or a bad associated with it. It's just it indicates this. Like the urchins in large numbers are extremely problematic. In small numbers they're really critical. Parrotfish, bumphead parrotfish, and all of them, if their populations have just exploded and there's nothing limiting them, they could pretty much graze down entire structures of reefs and prevent further recovery of reefs and all of that. So when coral larvae come and settle, you know if they're constantly foraging and breaking up the coral substrate and things like that, they can have its own impact. So I mean, we've just put those indicators there. There's the good and bad of it is very relative. Like I mean, you asked if it's within a threshold, it's all well and good. Sometimes, when those thresholds cross, which is why we want those numbers, right? For us to tell whether it's under control or not. Suddenly, in one particular year, if the numbers of parrotfish have just skyrocketed in a certain site, which means okay, there's something happening here, and one needs to go and see. And these are critical. Might just be an observation for someone who's in the water, but for us those are like critical things, right? That tells you what's happening on the reef, and that will probably help us dig a little bit more and find out if this is happening. Probably there's more fishing or there's some sewage pollution happening which is facilitating algal growth despite so many. So to sustain a huge population of parrotfish, you need a large amount of algae on a reef, which means the algae have some conducive situation happening there. And then, so for us, we will try and make those connections based on the numbers and things that come up, which is why, that information is useful for us. But like I said, that even now for us still, that's like a secondary thing. For us, the key thing is the outreach and the kind of engagement in doing a process like this creates in a diver, that's more critical than the data itself. Happy to take more questions, and Vish, if you want to stop, just let me know as well.
No, we're good. We have about another 15-20 minutes. If I mean, if people want to drop out, they can drop out, and maybe we can talk about just stuff later on. If you have less time, we can always close it down.
No,
Are there any
I'm
more?
good.
Are there any more questions from other people? We've been hogging this. so to say. Let me just call out people by one. Aishwarya, Jerry, then there's somebody called KS, then Lakshmi, who has joined us, I think, from Singapore. I'm not sure. And then
Hi.
Sanjay. Any questions? Anybody? Just feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, I think I can go, but it'll be from a very layperson's point of view because I don't know much of marine biology. Hi, Naveen. I think we have met once, if you remember, from Lakshadweep Islands.
Oh, hi, Lakshmi.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. So I remember that.
Just on a dive shop, whatever on a diving related conversation. That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
go
I
ahead.
remember seeing Dakshin's Fisher's logbook while we met. So I was wondering if the Reef logbook and the Fisher's logbook should sort of go hand in hand, or or how would you make comparisons out of it? I mean, this is just out of my curiosity, if that makes
So
sense.
that's an interesting question because the work with the fisher communities, the advantage is if you convince them the value of it, they will do it because it's associated with their livelihoods, their survival. The fish stock being healthy is something that's really critical for their own survival. And I think the same logic applies for a dive shop and the adjacent reefs. That the health of those reefs really matter for the sustenance of the dive shop as well. So, uh, but I think there's a direct livelihood, and the stakes are much higher in the fisheries monitoring program involving fisher communities in Lakshadweep, as opposed to this, which folks can still continue doing this. And I mean, without doing this as well, you can continue. But for fisheries stock management, which is really critical, and the decisions of how many boats can operate in a particular area, what's the stock size, you know what kind of engine capacities, what kind of nets and lines or whatever you can use, is all made based on those numbers, right? And the amount of subsidies, schemes, all of that that's available for a certain site is based on those numbers. Um, so when you convince a fisherman that you guys can collect much better information than probably what a you know fisheries department could collect, you guys can directly participate and contribute to your own well-being, is like a direct, and there are direct stakes involved in it. So I think that way it's very different from a normal citizen science program. A citizen science program is kind of structured for people who are urban elites, and to be very honest and brutal, is that it's structured for people who have the privilege of going out and watching nature for the pleasure of it, looking at birds, bird program, iNaturalist. Oh, I have the luxury to go to a certain site and take a picture. So you're basically missing out on all the rest of the people who are living there, a part of that system, day in, day out, they're part of that. So that program is like very different from a citizen science initiative because the stakes are very different there. I mean, people, that's like part of their life and they're just sharing that information. And one has to be very careful with, how that information is interpreted, how is it being used and all of that. Because if it comes back to create problems for them, we're the ones who are responsible for it. So for us, we've made it very clear what those, ownership of data and all of that is. Here, the stakes are not so high, right? I mean, here it's like, it's yeah, you have the time and luxury, please do contribute. So it's pretty much like a very altruistic kind of an initiative, citizen science initiative. The other is not completely out of an altruistic coming from there. It's coming from, you know I get this, there are some direct benefits if this numbers can tell exactly what's happening here. And they disagree quite often with the numbers that the government's numbers and statistics and stuff, because that's done by fishery scientists who come once a year, do one quick survey, and then say, okay, this is what is available, and we will decide on stuff based on those numbers. And then it's generalized to large scales, to an Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal kind of a scale, while things happening at a ground level might be very different from what's happening at a much larger regional scale. So that way, that process is very different from this process. Does that answer your question in a very long way? Lakshmi, if you're saying yes, you're muted.
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah. Anyone else with questions?
I have a question. The data that you're collecting with the aim of getting this from recreational divers, is there a possibility of this? What is your percentage of error? Because as a recreational diver, my aim would be to enjoy the dive, and while I'd be doing this particular thing as a add-on for fun, there is a possibility that I would miss, my tally would get messed up at some point, and there would obviously be some room for error. And so what Pankaj said, that you need a separate shop which is dedicated only to this, being a different matter. But since this was your original idea was to give it to people just diving for fun, what were you expecting to be the errors in the actual tallying?
Good question. I mean, we right now do not know exactly whatever standard deviation would be in terms of errors and stuff like that, but standard error would be. But what we did discuss this, at length and with certain dive shops in the islands. And I think the way we can only sort this out is by once in a while, a dive instructor or at least a dive master kind of a person who has a good handle on, on the species IDing and counting and all of that, once in a while collects that information, not once in a month, like whenever they can, collects that information and maintains that separately. And we use that to kind of look, try and understand, how much of error and all of that is coming in. And honestly, looking at we're also gonna keep track of what level of diving they are, like how many dives and stuff they've done in the past, to kind of also understand, you know, how credible it's going to be. But like I said, that the value of the data is, again, like I said, secondary, right? We're not expecting this to tell you exactly how to manage your reefs, but at least even if it is 2 or 3 groupers additionally or lesser, but if it's 15 groupers, or on an average, there are 50 logs in a month, and for a specific site, and you know and you get a certain variation from within that, you can figure those variations out, because some are migratory and highly mobile species, and certain species are very territorial. So say for instance, if grouper populations in a certain area is being collected by multiple divers, one can easily kind of arrive on some averages. It's not like each and every data point is currently being scrutinized or being evaluated for its value or credibility or whatever. But still, it's at least something is better than not having anything at all, right? And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. Just one more thing. Where do you get your base value from? In the sense, all of your deductions will be from whether this is relatively more or relatively less. So where are you getting that baseline value from?
There's no
Again, just
baseline.
from whoever.
The baselines will form by itself after, once. This is like starting from scratch. I mean, there's no baseline for any of these things from any of these waters. So you're starting this from scratch, and slowly, over a year's data, if you collect, that kind of forms your baseline. And then from there, you can always kind of keep figuring out ways to make it lesser and lesser error prone, figure out ways in which one can correct for error if possible. And then, 1 year's data set, then that becomes the base from which you kind of look at it further. There's no existing baselines. If it is there, well and good. But some of these sites, there's no baseline available. For most marine systems, there's no baseline whatsoever available. And yeah.
I mean, just to take this, given that there has been hardly any data that we ourselves as divers have collected, and who else is going to give this kind of data underwater? So any
Yeah.
like Naveen is, exactly, you have to start off afresh, and even the metrics have to be from let's say today or tomorrow, whenever we start our dives, and maintain a steady kind of log in order to be able to generate a usable baseline, because even if you do one, once in a month or something, it's not really going to benefit. It has to be more regular, because you want your sample points in that data set to be a smoother curve than jumps in, because at the end, if you have an erratic jump suddenly, that will get marked, but if it doesn't repeat, then it's not going to happen again. It's just like a one-off thing. So managing data sets and producing data is also really important, and knowing how to do it is something which Naveen will have to talk to us about someday, or maybe
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, if there's a free dive involved, I'm happy to come
oh
there,
yeah, for sure.
come there and help set up the protocols and stuff.
Yeah, as long as we're getting
I'm
something
sure
out of
there are
it.
many at Dakshin who would have jumped to that opportunity.
Yes. Yeah, because whilst we might be able to collect data, the correct way of collecting data and putting that data into a and the frequency, right? Because just data collection isn't enough. The frequency of data collection also makes a big difference to form a baseline. I mean, and we're talking about a baseline here. Once the baseline gets set, then again, it could be seasonal, but still relevant enough.
Yeah. So most systems, I've been working on reef systems for fairly long time, more than 10, 15 years. And, the way things change in these systems, and how, with every bleaching event, how things reorganize themselves, how, the same sites where we've been diving over and over, and it's impossible to collect all kinds of information, right? So I'm looking at recovery of reefs, and I'm just going there, the amount of time I have, 45 minutes underwater to an hour, sometimes hour and a half, or whatever, you get per dive. There's only so much that a researcher can collect as information, and that's why when we hear that there are so many people out there in the water, and spending time and able to and seeing the same things that we see, for us it's like it's a great opportunity. So like Venkat said, somewhere we have to start and get the ball rolling, and then see how things, it's not something that, and trends in natural systems, ecosystems and stuff are like long-term trends. What we see are like right now, and whatever most research is like 1 year, 2 year, 3 year kind of research, right? And most often than not, by the time you're publishing your papers or manuscripts and stuff like that, very honestly, things would have changed in the system by then, right? So you need constant data sets, and the non-availability of baselines, one has to create those. And this is, and whatever level of crudeness that information is, as a diver, experienced diver, some of the old divers who've been diving in certain sites for a fairly long time would have a lot of information to share about what they've seen as changes happening in that system, right? If you sit down and dig their brains, but it becomes very difficult for them to kind of place it in time and space, or where exactly did those happen. After a while, all of that gets muddled up. I've talked to a lot of senior divers, and it's incredible the amount of information that they have. But and I hear them, I'm like, hey, that's very interesting. That probably indicates this, or hey, I didn't know that this particular thing used to happen there. Now it looks very different. So just recording even those observations, converting them into something that's already recorded and a data point is very valuable. So like all of us said, we need to start somewhere, and hopefully let's start with some of these initiatives. Doesn't have to be Reef Log, but it could be anything that anyone is starting, as long as that's collected and put there in a way that can be useful. It's very good. People used to do those as oral histories and things like that in the past with all of that, but nowadays it's data driven, and decisions are all data driven. So if we have data, then that's all the more better. Sorry, Vish, I think you wanted to wrap it up.
Oh no, I was just fiddling with my video by mistake. Right. I mean, if we have any questions, any more specific questions, otherwise I'm going to stop the recording now. I mean, I thank you all for being here and being patient enough to wait for the long Q&A and us droning about stuff what we love, which is something which always happens. And when Siddharth Saini is also here from SSI India, and thank you for being here. We really appreciate what you're doing for the community. So thank you. And he keeps telling me that I keep droning a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, thanks for the opportunity, and I think thank everyone who's come, attended this talk, and hopefully we'll catch up or meet our paths will cross somewhere if you're out in the dive industry. Cool.
Right. Thank you so much. And
Thanks.
I'm just going to stop recording, and then we can maybe degenerate for a little bit.